This is Steve Hackett, who had once been the guitarist for Genesis during their more imaginative years with Peter Gabriel. No videos were made of Genesis back then because their shows were so theatrical nobody thought it necessary to cook one up. Another of the visual megastars of 70s arena rock was Yes, and so guitarist Steve Howe didn't make a video either until he started Asia.
Now, sure as the sun will cross the sky, this lie is over. Lost, like the tears that used to tide me over.
Now these two legendary art rock guitarists, Steve Hackett and Steve Howe, have together formed a new group called GTR.
At the peak of your respective careers with Genesis and Yes, the punks came along and really tore everything down. They called you dinosaurs and they hung, drew, and quartered you. You survived, I guess, but what was your feeling about it at the time?
We were pilloried mercilessly for having any kind of technique whatsoever. I'm not sure how much of that was constructive. I think at the end of the day, you have to say to yourself, well, too much reliance on technique's a bad thing, but, you know, I mean, if you sit down and you write songs and you bother to get involved with the subtleties of your instrument, I mean, without wanting to sound pompous, I think, you know, there's a whole school of approach in there that I think has got something to say.
It's all about Malcolm McLaren's fault, you know. He started saying, like, you know, oh, I don't want any musicians on my record, you know. And in a way, a lot of things, not that he was the originator of it, but he was part of that movement where people, you know, were looking for other kinds of sound. I think a musician, an experienced musician, should be able to, you know, not fit in with trends, but supersede trends and be able to accommodate the musical styles of the day without sacrificing what he wants to do.
But as I remember, the reviews in the papers were really vicious. I mean, you people were called dinosaurs and it was the death of rock and roll and so on. Were you very insulted? Were you angry?
We used to laugh. I mean, we used to laugh at some of the reviews. I mean, we'd be in hysterics, you know, when the first line was kind of, oh God, they're back with another rotten, horrible, smelly record, you know. I mean, you couldn't really take this, you know, at face value. I mean, you had to look at it and say, well, like, they don't like us, you know. So our groups went to areas where we were enjoyed and where, you know, there was an understanding of what we did.
The world is my oyster.
Despite the slander Hackett and Howe suffered from the new music critics, they are nonetheless frequently called into sessions to help improve new music. Steve Howe contributed to Trevor Horn's Studio Confections, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and Propaganda, working with the latest advances in audio technology. What's more, a 1981 incarnation of Yes with members of the Buggles, including Trevor Horn, proved just as popular as they had ever been in the 70s.
More in the mind of the body, the speed and the sense of the end, like a circular line that is drawn at an angle. I see when I'm with you to navigate waters, and finally answer to yes.
I imagine when musical engineers are trying to invent an instrument, they would come to you to test it out. What's the most modern, ultrasonic instrument that you've been introduced to in recent times?
Synthesized juice up?
It's the age of the add-on, isn't it? I mean, you play the guitar and you add this box, and that box, you know, adds something else.
So you were talking in that documentary, for instance, about playing guitar and it coming out sounding like a piano as it goes through the emulator.
Yeah, all the MIDI equipment, the emulator for the guitar is very good. They've even invented a harmonizer, not what they call it, a humanizer, sorry. And this takes the perfection that machines create, like MIDI and sequences, and actually breaks it down so it sounds more like human beings playing, which is a real full circle. We've got perfection, you know, synclavier, time codes, click tracks, you know, and then suddenly says, well, actually, I'm fed up with this. I want it to go wrong occasionally. So one of the new things is that, but also everything's getting cheaper. You know, digital reverb for 400 quid for your home studio. You know, all the things that people have wanted in equipment is gradually coming. I mean, God knows what we do when we run out of ideas of what we want. We go back to playing acoustic pianos and acoustic guitars.
This isn't the first time that there's been a kind of a convention of mega guitarists, but it hasn't always worked in the past. I'm thinking in particular of Robert Fripp and Andy Summers. When they put a couple of records together, it was kind of listless music. What kind of problems did you face when you got together? Were there ego problems? Was it really a crunch?
Well, I think we approached it from a different point of view. We did approach it as writers first and players second. So I don't think that we designed the kind of album that you could file under completely esoteric. We decided to make an accessible record.
I mean, Steve can see it like that, making an accessible record, but I wanted to make a less accessible record than...
We were coming from two sides of the spectrum,
Yeah,
really, you know, what he'd been doing previously and what I'd been doing.
So he was coming up to kind of more accessible, and I was going down to less accessible.
Right.
So I think that's really where we come up with. Certainly, we didn't want to do an indulgent jamming album that still cost as much as the GTR record, but all it had was like 2 days worth of "Hey man, this is groovy." You know, I think the music we're making satisfies the needs we have, and they are to have musical freedom without the responsibility of carrying on some legend.